Let's take a really old stamping technique and change it up and make it something new. Let me show you how. I'm going to start off with some glossy photo paper, some Distress Oxide re-inkers, and a Spellbinders embossing folder. I will be using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 to run my Spellbinders embossing folder through it with my glossy photo paper. Now the beauty here is that I can actually follow the sandwich recommendations because they're all the same company. I am choosing to use a non 3D embossing folder. I think a 3D embossing folder would actually cut through, and that would be undesirable for this particular technique. I want my image to be raised, so I'm going to put this in with the glossy side up. If you wanted it to be rather indented or debossed, you would put the glossy side down. If you don't have glossy photo paper, you could certainly use glossy cardstock as well. Look at that embossing. Oh, it's just beautiful. This folder is called Falling Leaves. To create my polished stone effect, I'm going to be using some Distress Oxide reinkers. Now, if you didn't see my fall colored ink blend in my short, I'll link it above, but I'm using the same colors because I loved them. I'm using Wild Honey, Ground Espresso, and Crackling Campfire, and some regular old rubbing alcohol on a cotton ball. So you need to saturate your cotton ball with some rubbing alcohol, and then I'm going to put about 3 dots of each of the 3 colors onto my saturated spot on the cotton ball. And I would have gone a little lighter on the brown because I do think it takes over, and maybe a little heavier on the yellow, but it still comes out stunning. And then we're just going to pounce. Now you don't want to pounce with your hand in the same direction. Move your cardstock, move your hand. That way you get a different pattern throughout your cardstock. You don't even have to go in a line. You can be very random with this. Pretty much anything goes, with the firm understanding that no two projects will ever look alike. You could even do second generation stamping and get a much lighter effect on a second piece of glossy cardstock or glossy photo paper. I am showing this to you in real time. I haven't sped it up at all. And the reason is that this particular embossing folder, although it's not 3D, it is very intricate. And you do see the veining in all of the leaves. And I really wanted to get some ink down into those veins. Now you could certainly do this in any color combination. I was just going for a fall theme, and you could certainly do it with lighter or darker inks. Now the second piece I'm going to do without any embossing whatsoever. I'm using the same colors um, and just randomly slapping the ink on. I really don't have any rhyme or reason to what I'm doing. I'm just pouncing along. Time to speed this baby up. Now, if you want a softer look, once you've pounced all of your ink on, take a dry cotton ball and just go over the blobs of ink, and it will certainly soften it up. This will dry rather quickly, and with the Distress Oxides, you're going to get a very hazy white effect, which is inherent of oxides. But I'm going to show you some magic. This is just a microfiber cloth, and I'm going to wipe it off. Look at the phenomenal shine that you get. It's gorgeous. Moving on to the embossed piece of photo cardstock, I did find that I needed to be a little more gentle because some of the edges came up with it, but I think that's inherent of the photo paper. It is layered. Um, but here I am just kind of giving a gentle rub to kind of get that oxide look out of the veining of the leaves. You could certainly leave that alone and just do the top, um, and it still leaves a really cool effect, but whatever you like. Hey y'all, I'm Wendy from Village Card and Craft, and I want to thank you for choosing to spend your time with me today. If you find value or enjoyment from my video, please consider giving me a thumbs up and hitting the subscribe button. We'd love to have you be a part of the Village Card and Craft community. So my vision for this flat panel one that we did second was to see if I could emboss it. So I'm going to use Spellbinder's stamp. This is called Sparkle Burst. And I kind of envisioned it to kind of be like fireworks. And let's see what happens. Now for this, I highly recommend a stamp positioning tool because you want this to make it in one shot. You really don't have the ability to stamp multiple times on the cardstock because you're going to see in just a second that the cardstock is going to stick really well to that stamp. So it's kind of a one and done here for the embossing. So this is the first time that I'm using this particular stamp, so it is superbly sticky. So I'm just going to go ahead and reposition that stamp. And as you can see, it even pulls up the magnet. So like I said, it's a one and done. Now, because it was so sticky, I decided to go ahead and use my second magnet and help in hopes that it was going to hold the cardstock down without shifting. We shall see. Now, remember I said this is brand new, so I am using my glue eraser to remove any chemical gunk off that stamp for a first time use. And Versamark. So I'm going to make sure that I really ink up this stamp well the first time because there are no second chances. Now, if you've been stamping a long time, you recognize right there that I forgot the anti-static powder bag, as I typically do. But it really didn't make any difference whatsoever to my final product. And for good measure, I'm just using a whiteboard eraser to make sure that I have transferred all my Versamark. I'm going to carefully remove that photo paper from the stamp because obviously it's still stuck, and I'm just going to try to keep any additional ink from it. Now I use, this is Ranger's Gold embossing powder, and I'm just using it over a piece of copy paper or packaging and covering my entire image and tapping it off. Now I do end up with some strays, but nothing major. Now, if you're a klutz in the craft room, like I am, make sure that you go ahead and dump your embossing powder back into its little pot and put the lid on. I imagine that photo paper has got some similar properties to Yupo paper because it definitely will warp like Yupo paper if you apply heat to it. So some tips here. Make sure that your heat gun is well and truly heated up. Keep your heat gun moving at all times and also give it breaks in between. It definitely took longer for me to melt the embossing powder than what I even expected. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very old technique. Stampin' Up, I think somebody designed it or created it, but Stampin' Up inks are dye-based. And the Distress Oxides are a hybrid ink, so they are part dye, part pigment. So they're a lot more opaque than the dye inks are. If you want something lighter, more muted, go with the dye ink. But remember, you're not going to get the same magic that you get with the oxides because you get that creamy oxide look, and when you wipe it off, it's just so satisfying. But you can do all the techniques with this. You can emboss, you can stamp, you can die cut with it, you could stencil over it. Just about anything you could think of in the card making world, you could certainly use. Let me know in the comments below if you've done this technique in the past and if you've got something really cool that you want to add to it. With that part done, I have set it aside and I'm going to work on some of the elements for the falling leaves embossed card. I am using lumberjack plaid, ground espresso, and black soot on some die cuts. Now, I can't tell you what kind of die cuts these are because I cut them out on my Cricut. Use what you have. So if you have a Cricut and you can't find an element that you're looking to use on your card, cut it on your Cricut. If you've got the element, fantastic, use it. I didn't have a happy birthday sentiment that I was very happy with, so that is also cut with my Cricut. I did cut it twice, and I do have some brand new Cricut mats, so they are extremely sticky. So some of the sticky ends up on the back, but that kind of works out to my advantage because it clings to my glass mat. So I am just inking up my maple leaf here, and I inked it up with the lumberjack plaid first, and now I'm going in and just doing a little bit of the edges and pulling it inward of the ground espresso. And then I'm going to use black soot. Now, you would think that black soot would be far too dark and ruin the project, but it really does give it some dimension that you ordinarily wouldn't have. When a leaf falls off a tree, it's not necessarily all the same color, so I'm changing it up. I am also going to kind of do an ombre effect on my happy birthday. So I'm using a very small mini blending brush, and I'm going over it with the ground espresso, and I believe the black soot would be next as well. Now at the top of my screen, you'll see in the little triangle tray, I have the tittles for the eye. So that's the little dot for the eye, otherwise I would lose them. And I also have an offset cut. So this would kind of be your shadow cut if you have a standard die set that I cut out in vellum. Once again, I did it on my Cricut. Um, I have made a similar card, which I'll show you at the end, that I did not use an offset, and I used gold cardstock, metallic cardstock. And unfortunately, although it's beautiful, it does blend in a little more than I wanted. That's why on this card, I wanted you to be able to see the happy birthday a little bit more prominently, and I thought that the vellum would be a great opportunity to do that. Elements are drying, I'm going to work on my base for my cardstock. Now I use Accent Opaque 100-pound cardstock for my bases, and I didn't want to add any more bulk than I'm already going to have with one additional layer. So I don't have any colored cardstock for my bases, so I'm going to make it. And I'm just using a blending brush. I have slid a piece of paper in between so I don't get any ink on my bottom portion of my card base. And I'm using ground espresso all the way around the edges. There's no need to do the whole piece of cardstock because it's going to get covered, but it does give you the look of having an extra colored piece of cardstock as a layer. Next up, it's time to cut the cardstock, the photo cardstock, down to size. Now, I do have a matting layer that will be red on both of these, so I'm going to cut them down to 3.75 by 5 inches. I have cut my red matting layer down to 4 inches by 5.25 inches, and I'm just lining it up to make sure that I know where I want it. I'm going to attach my red layer to the brown card base with Barely Arts Precision Craft Glue. However, I am not going to be using that type of glue for the photo paper. I did find when I practiced that this particular glue was not the best choice. I end up using a dry adhesive. Now this one is scrapbook.com's dry adhesive, and it's great, guys. It holds nicely in your hand. You've got good control over it. And when I got this, it was a freebie. So if you shop scrapbook.com, please don't forget to get your free items. So I'm going to work on the happy birthday with the vellum shadow. And the first thing I need to do is put some adhesive onto my happy birthday. I am using Artist Tack along with my Barely Arts Precision Craft Glue. I needed to give myself a little bit of wiggle room, and my liquid glue will allow me to do that. So right now I'm just putting those micro dots onto the back of the happy birthday with Artist Tack, which is fantastic stuff. Um, and I'm going to use a pair of fine tweezers to attach that to the front of the vellum. Now, anybody who's used vellum knows that no matter what you do, you can see the adhesive through vellum. So I'm going to show you a really clever trick on how to keep that from happening. So I'm moving to the second happy birthday. Now I don't want my micro dots on the back of the happy birthday. I want them on the top of the happy birthday. So I need to put it face down in my artist tack, give it a great rub to release some of those micro dots. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing by adding some Precision Arts, Barely Arts Precision Crack Glue. With the liquid glue on the top of the happy birthday, I am now going to put it on the back of my vellum. So the vellum is going to be on top of the second happy birthday. I'm literally sandwiching the vellum between two happy birthday sentiments. So I'm just lining up a couple of elements. I made a cake and a sentiment that says, "You're the icing on the cake" for my happy birthday card. And I'm just going to pop up my cake with some foam squares to give it a little added dimension. This is Hero Art's Time for Cake stamp and die set. And ironically, I forgot I had the dies. I didn't turn it over to see the dies there, so I hand cut those. And that's going to finish that card up. And if you're wondering how I colored the cake, all I did was use some Copics. I am brand new to them, so I'm certainly not great, and I definitely didn't feature it here. But my icing on the cake was stamped in lumberjack plaid and covered with clear embossing powder. For the leaf die cut, I didn't feel it was enough, so I decided to zhuzh it up with a little lunar paste. This one is the gold one called Slippery When Wet, and I just used my good old-fashioned fingers to smear it on there to get a little extra color. And to give the leaf just a little more pop once it was dry, I took out a stamping foam and that little ball tool to contour my leaves. I just wanted them to crinkle up just a little bit. To finish up my ombre polished stone technique card, I am adding liquid glue to my vellum happy birthday element. And that's the beauty of using the vellum sandwiched between your cardstock. It kind of gives it just a little bit of elevation. You could add more cardstock to the back if you wanted to add a little more. But by adding glue to the cardstock, it won't show through to your vellum. So it really is a great technique. And then I am going to finish that up with some dry adhesive from scrapbook.com on my leaf, as well as a little bit more liquid glue, just so that I have time to tweak it if I'm not happy with where it lands. This is the practice card that I made to start with, and then the final two cards that I shared with you today. I hope you enjoyed them. We'll see you real soon.